The year was 1790. Winter gripped the land with icy fingers that showed no mercy. In a small village nestled between snowy mountains, a woman named Mara watched the sunrise, her breath making clouds in the freezing air. Mara was not free. She and her entire village had been enslaved by cruel men who had come from across the sea. These men forced the villagers to work in mines, digging for gold and precious stones, even as snow piled high outside. But Mara was special. Though she couldn't read or write, she was smarter than anyone knew. She watched. She listened. She remembered everything. One day soon, she whispered to herself each morning, "We will be free." Mara was 30 years old, with strong hands and keen dark eyes that missed nothing. The other villagers looked up to her, even though she kept to herself most of the time. They knew she was always thinking, always planning. Life in the village was hard. They worked from dawn until dusk with little food. The guards were quick to use their whips if anyone moved too slowly. But at night, in their small huts, the villagers would gather around tiny fires and tell stories of better days. "Remember how we used to celebrate the winter festival?" An old woman would whisper, "with dancing and special bread sweetened with honey. My children have never known such joy." Another would say softly, tears in her eyes. Mara listened to these stories and felt a fire growing inside her, not of warmth, but of determination. She refused to let her people suffer forever. Every day, she watched the guards, how they changed shifts, how they stored their weapons, how many there were. She noticed that the head guard, a man named Blackwood, kept a ring of keys on his belt at all times. Keys that could unlock the storeroom where food and blankets were kept. Keys that could unlock the gate that kept them all trapped. Only 15 guards controlled over 100 villagers. Mara often wondered why her people didn't fight back. The answer was simple: fear. Fear and the bitter cold of winter that sapped their strength and hope. But then something happened that changed everything. One night, as Mara carried water from the well, she overheard 2 guards talking. "The supply wagon is 3 weeks late," one said. "If it doesn't come soon, we'll start running out of food. The boss says if that happens, we feed ourselves first," the other replied with a laugh. "The workers can starve until spring. We'll get new ones." Mara froze. If the guard supplies were running low, her people would be the first to go hungry, or worse. She had to act now. As she slipped back to her hut, she noticed something strange. A guard named Thomas was watching her. But instead of yelling or threatening her, he quickly looked away. And was that guilt in his eyes? Mara had found something she didn't expect, a possible ally among her enemies. Now she needed a plan that would save everyone before the harshest part of winter arrived and sealed their fate forever. That night, Mara couldn't sleep. The guard's words echoed in her mind. "The workers can starve until spring. We'll get new ones." Her people were seen as tools to be used and thrown away. The thought made her chest tighten with anger. But anger alone wouldn't save anyone. She needed to be smart. The next morning, Mara volunteered to work in the kitchen hut, where the guards' meals were prepared. This was unusual. Most villagers tried to avoid the kitchen because the head cook, a mean woman who had sided with the captors, would report anyone who took even a scrap of extra food. As Mara chopped vegetables for the guards' stew, she carefully watched everything. She noted where the keys to the food storage were kept. She observed which guards ate first and which ate last. Most importantly, she noticed that guard Thomas ate very little and often slipped his bread into his pocket. For 3 days, Mara worked in the kitchen, gathering information. On the 4th day, she deliberately dropped a pot near Thomas's feet when no one else was looking. "I'm sorry," she whispered as they both bent to clean the mess. Thomas glanced around nervously. "Be careful," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "They're planning to reduce rations again tomorrow." Before Mara could respond, the head cook shouted at her to get back to work. But now she knew Thomas could be trusted. That night, a fierce snowstorm hit the village. Wind howled through cracks in the wooden huts. The children cried from cold and hunger. An elderly man died in his sleep, his body too weak to fight the cold any longer. Mara knew they were running out of time. The next day, She deliberately cut her hand while working. Not deeply, but enough to bleed. The head cook ordered her to go see the camp doctor, a cruel man who barely treated the villagers' injuries. But instead of going to the doctor, Mara slipped away to the back of the camp, where Thomas was on guard duty alone. "I need your help," she said boldly, stepping out of the shadows. Thomas jumped, his hand moving to his weapon. When he saw it was Mara, his shoulders relaxed, but his eyes darted nervously. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "They'll whip you if they find you." "Why do you care?" Mara asked. "You're one of them." Thomas looked down. "No, I was forced to join them. My family owed a debt. I never wanted this." "Then help us," Mara whispered fiercely. "The children are starving. The elders are dying. What can I do? I'm just one man. One man with access to keys, weapons, and information," Mara said. "I have a plan, but I need to know more about the guards' routines at night and when the next supply wagon is really coming." Thomas hesitated, fear written on his face. But then he nodded slowly. "The wagon is stuck in a mountain pass," he said. "It won't arrive for at least 2 more weeks. The captain is worried. That's why he's cutting your rations, to save food for the guards." "And the night watch?" Mara asked. "Only 3 men on duty after midnight. One at the main gate, one patrolling, and one in the watchtower. The others sleep in the big house." A plan was forming in Mara's mind, dangerous but possible. Before she could ask more questions, they heard footsteps approaching. "Go," Thomas hissed. "Behind that woodpile. I'll find you tomorrow." Mara slipped away just as another guard rounded the corner. That night, she gathered 5 people she trusted most. Her sister Lena, an old hunter named Kofi, twin brothers who had once been warriors in their homeland, and a young woman who could move as quietly as a shadow. "I have a way out," Mara told them, her voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. "But we must all work together, and it will be dangerous." "We're already dying slowly," Kofi said. "I'd rather die trying to be free." The others nodded in agreement. Mara leaned forward and began to explain her plan. But as she did, she didn't notice a shadow moving outside their hut. Someone was listening. Someone who could destroy everything before it even began. The shadow outside the hut moved closer. Hearts pounding, Mara and her team fell silent. The door creaked open, letting in a blast of cold air and a small boy, no more than 8 years old. It was Teo, Lena's son. "Mama," he whispered, his voice trembling. "The guard captain is coming to check the huts. He looks angry." They barely had time to hide their meeting before the door burst open again. Captain Blackwood stood there, his face red from cold and anger. "Random inspection," he snarled, looking around the tiny space. Finding nothing suspicious, he left with a warning. "Anyone found outside after dark tomorrow will be made an example of. The supply wagon is delayed, and I won't tolerate any trouble." After he left, Mara let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "We need to move faster," she said. "Tomorrow night." The next day dragged by slowly. Mara worked in the fields, digging through frozen soil for the roots the guards demanded. Her hands bled from the cold, but her mind was racing, going over every detail of her plan. At midday, Thomas walked past her work area. Without looking at her, he dropped something in the snow. When no one was watching, Mara picked it up, a small map showing the guard positions at night, and a note. "The storage key hangs in the captain's office during dinner." One piece of the puzzle solved. But Mara needed more than just food for her people. She needed weapons, warm clothes, and a head start before the guards realized they were gone. As the sun began to set, Mara put her plan into action. She asked Kofi to tell stories to the children, gathering them all in one hut, making them easier to collect when the time came. She had the twin brothers quietly spread the word. "Be ready to move at midnight. Bring only what you can carry." And then she did something unexpected. She went to the camp doctor with a story about strange spots appearing on her skin. "It looks like the fever that killed half a village south of here last winter," she lied, showing him a rash she'd created by rubbing snow and salt on her arm until it was red and blotchy. The doctor stepped back in alarm. "How many others have this?" "I've seen it on at least 5 people," Mara said, her eyes wide with false fear. "It spreads fast in close quarters. The doctor hurried to tell Captain Blackwood. Just as Mara had hoped, the captain immediately ordered the guards not to enter the villagers' huts until further notice, fearing contagion. This would buy them precious hours before anyone noticed they were gone. As darkness fell, Mara slipped away during dinner time. Moving like a shadow, she crept to the captain's office while he and most of the guards ate in the main hall. The key was there, just as Thomas had said. She snatched it and headed for the storage hut. Inside, she found sacks of dried meat, flour, and, most valuable of all, winter coats meant for the guards. She couldn't take everything, so she chose carefully, hiding her selections in prearranged spots around the village fence. Returning the key was harder. As Mara approached the captain's office, she heard voices inside. The captain had finished his meal early. She froze, the key clutched in her sweating palm. Just then, a loud crash came from the kitchen. Through the window, Mara saw Lena had accidentally dropped an entire shelf of dishes. In the confusion, Mara slipped into the office, returned the key, and escaped unseen. By nightfall, Mara's heart was racing. Everything was ready. But as she returned to her hut to wait for midnight, a rough hand grabbed her arm. "I know what you're planning," growled a voice. It was the head cook, the woman who had allied herself with the guards. "And I'll tell the captain unless you give me something worth my silence." Mara's mind raced. She couldn't let this woman ruin everything, but she had no valuables to offer. "The captain keeps gold in his office," Mara said quickly. "I know how to get it. Come with me at midnight, and you'll have more than enough to start a new life far from here." The cook's eyes gleamed with greed. "Midnight, then? But if you're lying—" "I'm not," Mara said firmly, though her heart pounded with fear. As the cook walked away, Thomas appeared from around a corner. "I heard everything," he whispered urgently. "She can't be trusted. She'll betray you at the first chance." "I know," Mara said. "That's why I need your help with her." At 11 o'clock, as the camp settled into silence, the storm that had been threatening all day finally broke. Snow fell in thick blankets, and wind howled across the compound. Perfect cover for their escape. Mara gathered her team. "Remember the plan," she said. "Thomas will create a distraction at the main gate. Kofi and I will lead the first group through the hole in the fence behind the storage hut. The twins will handle the second group. We meet at the old oak tree across the valley." "What about the cook?" Lena asked nervously. "I'll deal with her," Mara said, her face grim. As midnight approached, tension grew thick in the air. Children were woken and told to be absolutely silent. The elderly were helped to their feet, wrapped in extra blankets. And then, just as Mara prepared to give the signal to move, alarm bells began to ring throughout the camp. "They know," she whispered in horror. The alarm bells cut through the night. Mara's heart sank as torch lights began to appear across the compound. "They know," she whispered again. But Thomas suddenly appeared beside her, his face flushed from running. "No, it's not about the escape. There's a fire in the captain's quarters. I started it." Relief washed over Mara, quickly replaced by urgent determination. "This is even better," she said. "Everyone move now." As guards rushed to fight the fire, Mara and her team sprang into action. The villagers moved in groups through the howling storm, staying low and following their assigned leaders. The hole Thomas had cut in the fence, hidden behind the storage hut, was barely visible in the blizzard. One by one, families slipped through to freedom. Children were passed through first, then the elderly. The strong adults carried what supplies they could. The head cook appeared, as promised, expecting Mara to lead her to gold. Instead, she found herself face to face with Kofi. "Mara sent me to guide you," he said. But instead of taking her to the captain's office, he led her away from the escape route, circling the compound and wasting precious time until she realized she'd been tricked. "Guards!" she screamed, but her voice was lost in the howling wind and commotion of the fire. Meanwhile, Mara worked frantically, helping person after person through the fence. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Someone twisted an ankle. A baby began to cry, but was quickly soothed. "That's the last group," Lena reported as the twins led the final families through. "Go," Mara urged her. "Get Teo to safety. I need to make sure no one is left behind." Lena hesitated, then hugged her sister fiercely before disappearing into the storm. Mara made one final sweep through the now empty huts. By the time she returned to the fence, she could hear shouts of alarm from across the compound. The fire was under control, and someone had discovered the empty huts. "There she is," came a shout. Captain Blackwood himself was pointing at her, his face contorted with rage. Mara dove through the hole in the fence just as a bullet hit the wood beside her head. She rolled into the snow and started running, following the faint tracks of her people. Behind her, confusion reigned in the camp. The guards had no idea how many people had escaped or which direction they had gone. The blizzard was quickly covering all traces. But Captain Blackwood wasn't giving up easily. He gathered 10 men and began to follow Mara's footprints, which were still visible in the fresh snow. Mara ran until her lungs burned, catching up to the slowest group of her people. The old oak tree where they planned to meet was still half a mile away. "They're following us," she gasped to the twins, who were helping an elderly couple through the deep snow. One of the twins nodded grimly. "We prepared for this," he said, and whistled a soft signal. From the shadows of the trees ahead, Thomas appeared with 3 horses he had stolen from the guard's stable. "I can lead them away," he said. "Create false trails." "It's too dangerous," Mara argued. "I helped put your people in chains," Thomas said firmly. "Let me help set them free." While Thomas rode off in one direction, creating obvious tracks, Mara's people continued toward their meeting point, where Kofi was waiting with an unexpected surprise, a large fishing boat hidden on the shore of a nearby lake. "The lake never completely freezes near the hot springs," Kofi explained. "We can cross to the other side and be miles away by dawn." As they loaded the boat, the sound of distant gunshots echoed across the valley. Mara looked back, her heart heavy with fear for Thomas. The boat was crowded and riding low in the water. The crossing was treacherous, with ice floes threatening to puncture the hull. Children huddled together for warmth while adults took turns rowing. But slowly, steadily, they made progress through the dark waters. By dawn, they had reached the far shore and followed a narrow trail up into the hills, where Kofi knew of caves that would provide shelter. From this vantage point, they could see the guard compound in the distance, tiny figures of men still searching the nearby woods. "We did it," Lena whispered, squeezing Mara's hand. But Mara's joy was tempered with worry. "Thomas," she began. As if in answer to her unspoken question, a lone figure appeared on the path below. Limping, bleeding from a wound in his shoulder, but alive, Thomas had somehow escaped and found them. "The captain thinks you headed west," he gasped as Kofi helped him sit. "They won't look this way for at least a day." That day turned into a week of hard travel. They moved only at night, navigating by stars through mountain passes that the guards wouldn't dare follow. The food they had stolen was carefully rationed. When a child developed a fever, Mara used herbs she had secretly gathered to bring it down. Finally, after 7 days of journey, they reached what Thomas had promised them, a settlement of free people, former slaves who had escaped years before. Here, hidden in a valley protected by mountains on all sides, these people had built a new life. The villagers were welcomed with open arms, given warm food and shelter from the bitter cold. As Mara watched her people begin to smile again, truly smile, for the first time in years, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. That spring, when the mountain passes cleared, word came that the guard compound had been abandoned. The remaining captives had risen up during the confusion of that night, inspired by Mara's escape. The captain and most of his men had fled, returning to their ships and sailing away. Mara and Thomas eventually married, combining their courage and compassion to help lead their new community. They never forgot the night of the blizzard, when one woman's clever plan and determined spirit had freed not just herself, but an entire village. Years later, travelers would sometimes pass through the valley and hear the story of Mara, the woman who outsmarted her captors and led her people to freedom through the darkest night of winter. Her story was passed down from generation to generation, a reminder that even in the coldest times, courage and cleverness could light the way to freedom.